Good afternoon, everyone, and a warm welcome to H Farm. It is a great privilege to welcome today Lord David Puttnam, Oscar-winning producer, public servant, educator, thinker, and one of the most important voices of our time on cinema, culture, technology, democracy, and responsibility. Many of us know his work through films that entered the history of cinema, and perhaps even more deeply, the private memory of those who watched them. Chariots of Fire, Midnight Express, The Killing Fields, The Local Hero, and The Mission. I've watched and loved all of them. I first watched some of them on VHS, which some of you here will remember well, and others may not even know what I'm talking about. Yet, there was something beautiful in that old ritual, the waiting, the rewinding, the physicality of the tape, the sense that a film asked for time. It did not just pass before us, we had to make room for it. Perhaps this already says something about why we are gathered here today. What strikes me in Lord Puttnam's reflection on his life is the sense of a journey shaped by choices, real choices, the kind that give a life its form, the kind that oblige a person to cross a threshold, to leave something behind, to accept a risk, to decide whether to remain a spectator or become answerable. There is in every human life something of a mission, or perhaps something of an adventure. We do not always recognize the call when it comes first. Sometimes we understand it only later, when the apparently accidental station of a life begin to reveal a hidden pattern. The great myths knew this already. Joseph Campbell gave it a modern language. The call, the departure, the trial, the transformation, the return. But this is not a fantasy. It is one of the deep human structure. We leave the familiar. We are tested by what we did not expect. We are forced to choose. And if the journey has been real, we do not return quite as we were. Lord Puttnam's life seems to carry something of this pattern. From the child of wartime in London, to the young man finding his way through advertising and cinema, to the producer who brought to the world some of the most morally serious films on modern cinema, to the public figure who turned his attention to education, democracy, technology, climate, and civic responsibility. There is another strand in his story which matters, especially in a school. Lord Puttnam has spoken with striking candor about what school had a place in his life. It did not speak to him or see him fully. And yet, this did not make him indifferent to the education. Quite the opposite. It seems to have made education one of the great moral projects of his life. That is a profound paradox, and one worth holding for a moment. Perhaps what failed him was not learning, but a certain form of schooling. Not knowledge, but the absence of recognition. A young person does not become fully alive because information is placed before him. Something more mysterious is needed. A relationship, a look, a work, a word with a teacher, a film, a book, a person who sees in us something we have not yet learned to see in ourselves. Before things, there are relationships. Before systems, there are encounters. And before curriculum, there is the human face. And perhaps this is why Lord Puttnam's later commitment to education is so moving. It comes from experience. It comes from knowing that a life can be missed by the wrong kind of institution and awakened by the right kind of encounter. This brings us to cinema and to storytelling. Stories matter because choices matter. Stories show human beings at the point of decision. They show what happens when conscience meets history, when private life is interrupted by public events, when comfort is no longer enough. A serious story does not leave us untouched. It asks what we would have done. It asks what we are doing now. In this sense, good cinema belongs very close to good literature. A great film, like a great novel or a poem, is never exhausted by its plot. It alters the quality of our attention. It asks us to look again. George Steiner wrote with such seriousness about reading because for him to read was an act of response, almost of moral answerability. To understand the work was to allow it to enter one's life. To comprehend is in the deepest sense to take something with us. Cum prehendo, Latin. We carry it after the page has been closed, after the lights have come back on, after the screen has gone dark. That is why a great film can be read as one reads a book. We return to it and it is no longer the same, because we are no longer the same. What once moved us now questions us. What once seemed clear opens another chamber of meaning. For me, no film expresses this more powerful than The Mission. I watched it first when I was young, and then again in my 20s. Like all great works, it gave me more the second time than it had given me the first. The film had not changed, but I had. It remained with me with the force of a book one cannot quite put back on the shelf. It became part of that inner library of images, wounds, and questions through which one continues to understand the world. And then there is Morricone. The music of The Mission is almost a myth in itself. The oboe calls across the forest like a human breath searching for an answer. The voices gather water, sky, prayer, and grief into one fragile sound. That music has the strange power of all great art. It makes beauty inseparable from sorrow. It allows us to feel that the world is wounded, and yet still capable of grace. And this is why beauty matters. Beauty is not mere decoration. It is not softness added to the serious business of life. Beauty strikes through us. It disarms us. It can make truth bearable and goodness visible before either can be fully explained. At H Farm, we often speak about truth, good, and beauty. And these are not abstract words. They ask something of us. They ask whether education is merely preparation for success or also an initiation into responsibility, whether knowledge is useful alone or capable of making us more human, whether beauty is an ornament or one of the ways in which truth first reaches someone's heart. The word mission belongs here, and I do not mean it as a slogan or as something simple and innocent. A mission can be noble and it can be dangerous. It can be generous and it can be blind. It can contain courage, ambiguity, sacrifice, even failure. That is why it is such a powerful word for education, for cinema, and for life. It asks what we are prepared to serve. It asks what our beliefs become when they enter history. And this brings us to one of the deepest themes in Lord Puttnam's life and work, the moral duty of taking a stance in life. Stories are never neutral in their effects. They can enlarge our sympathies or narrow them. They can awaken responsibility or teach us to look away. They can help us recognize the humanity of others or make us complicit in forgetting it. Cinema has this power because it speaks to the whole human being: sight, sound, memory, emotion, conscience. It reaches beneath argument into that place where our sense of the world is being formed. To tell a story is already to choose what matters. To listen to a story seriously is to ask what kind of claim it is making upon us. And this matters especially here at H-Farm, because our students are growing up in a world overflowing with images, narratives, fragments, screens, voices, promises. To educate them is to help them ask better questions of what they see, what they admire, what they repeat, what they resist, and what they choose to become. So today, I hope we can listen with the attention we give to a serious book, or to a great film, to a piece of music that continues within us after the last note is faded. Lord Puttnam, thank you for being with us. We are honored to have you here at H-Farm. Lord Puttnam, please come on stage with us. Yeah, please.
Yeah, thank you very much for that incredibly warm introduction. Halfway through, I thought, you're describing a very interesting person here. I wonder who he is. I guess at the end it was me, but I didn't necessarily recognize myself all the time. This is quite tricky for me, because normally I teach seminars that last roughly 12 hours, not all at once, but over a period of time. So what I've tried to do this afternoon is synthesize some of those thoughts, if you like, some of those provocations, quite deliberately, that I think give us flavor of what I think I'm about and the things that matter to me, and hopefully you'll agree. But I'm going to start with a story. I just came from New York, so I'm a little jet-lagged, but I told a story there that went down well, so I'm going to try again. I left school at 16. Put another way, I was persuaded by the school to leave school at 16, and went to what are called night school. So I was at night school. I then I was a messenger in an advertising agency, and there was one advertising agency that was doing wonderful work. So I wrote to them several times. Eventually, I got an interview, and eventually I got a job. Very lowly job, but I got a job there. And my shock was how really brilliant these other people were. And I knew I was punching above my weight. I was going to be struggling, and that was an issue for me. So I was terrified. Patsy and I were married. We had our first child. So I went to see my boss, because I thought at least I could explain to him my nervousness and how grateful I was. So he was a man from Yorkshire. Yorkshiremen are very stern. So I knock at the door and he says, "Come in." So I went in. He said, "What would you like? What do you want, lad?" So I said, "Well, I thought I'd just let you know how very happy I am here, how much I value this job, how important it is to me." And he said, no. He said, "Why are you here?" I said, "What do you?" He said, "Why are you here? What do you think you're doing here?" I said, "I don't know. I wrote to you several times and you interviewed me." And no, he said, "Not at all." He said, "You are here for one reason." He said, "You are here to amaze me. You are not amazing me. Start amazing me, and you'll keep your job." So, thank you very much. And I left. I went back to my little cubicle, and I think I wept. And I don't think I was ever amazing, but I survived. But the notion that you're required to be amazing is not a bad idea, because all of you are going to move into a very, very difficult world. My generation and successive generations have not left you an easy call. And you're going to have to be amazing. You're going to have to amaze yourselves sometimes. You may amaze other people. But amazing is no longer a ridiculous word. It used to be. It's now an expectation. So for amazing, now think of it as being a reasonable expectation. So I'm going to show some slides and clips and see what you make of them, but they're important to me. Okay, Bob Dylan, a hugely important person in my life. Some of you would have seen the movie, the biopic, in the last couple of years. He said this in his book: "If you were born with the ability to change someone's life, why would you waste it?" Think about that. If possibly you were born to change just one person's life, why would you ever wish to waste it? Now, it's very easy, I think, to stand here as an old man, very old man, and pontificate. But what's important is the views I have not really changed. So I want to show a clip from a very short clip, 1 minute clip, from an interview that I did in 1988, good number of years ago, which I think illustrates what my thinking was then, and in a sense, what my thinking is today.
But do you think people do things differently because of what they see on that screen?
Not on any one film. No, I don't think any one film's ever going to change anything, and I don't think any one newspaper article's ever going to change anything. But over a period of years, the drip, drip, drip of a lot of good movies, a lot of movies that address real issues, a lot of good articles, the quality of newspapers, the caliber and integrity of newspaper editors, very, very, very important. The effect of that drip, drip, drip daily diet of views and ideas that adhere to what's best in society, that has an effect. Not one movie, not one article, but just the fact that all of us buckle down and try and do better and be better.
You said a movie tinkers around inside your brain. It steals up to form or confirm social attitudes, that movies actually can help to create a healthy, informed, concerned, and inquisitive society, or a negative, apathetic, and ignorant one.
I believe that absolutely sincerely.
The point here is, when I say that the drip, drip, drip of good movies can improve you, can make you think, can widen your horizons, it's equally true, and more true today than ever, that the drip, drip, drip of bad information, of negative information, of inaccurate information, can end up destroying your attitudes. It can make you feel helpless, or hopeless, or that nothing can change. So the weird thing about information communications, be it movies, be it newspaper articles, be it YouTube, be it television, the difference between reliable, solid information and inaccurate, damaging information is colossal. It's absolutely colossal. The big challenge, of course, for my world, always, was the battle between culture and commerce. Of course, you try to make a film that will make some money, because then you can make your next movie. But at the same time, if you start to lose your values, if you start to lose sight of what the culture is, you become potentially quite dangerous. You become really a liability. So this battle, culture versus commerce, you can't avoid it. Every single one of you will encounter it at some point in your lives. It's there, not avoidable. Now, what's interesting about cinema, this is a slightly longer clip, is that all cinema, in fact, most information, is at its essence political. It's unavoidably political. That makes some people quite uncomfortable, but it is the truth. Here's a short clip that tries to explain why.
Every single film that you watch or will ever watch is political. Whether it's the politics of the filmmaker, the characters in the story, or how the film was made, you can trace some sort of ideology in every single film that you watch. Film is a language, and the camera is a microphone. Let's turn to a film that might not immediately come to mind when discussing politics and film. Ratatouille is a display of progressive ideology, that anyone, anywhere, can do anything, and to see X fight, meet, or appear in X. Marvel has it pretty easy as a company. They basically fill in the blanks. Independent filmmakers are not exempt either. They still understand the world and the people around us. Cinema is one of the languages through which the world communicates itself to itself.
Now that phrase, media literacy, also now digital literacy, is incredibly important. I'm not sure that the education system that was being described earlier fully understands how vital it is. If by the age of, and I'm being arbitrary here, if by the age of 12 you haven't been helped to understand the difference between information and disinformation, you're very, very, very vulnerable. And it means that you're going to make some false judgments, inevitably. So digital literacy and media literacy are fundamental subjects. They're not nice to have. They're absolutely essential to live a full and I think successful life. I spent 10 years at one point in my making movies, all of which were political, one way or another. Although, interestingly, no one ever really accused them of being political, but they were. I knew exactly what those films were about. I knew exactly what those films were trying to say, and exactly the kind of world that I was trying to, if in a sense, promote. And in that sense, they were political, and I was propagandizing to an extent. One of my favorite films last year was, the English title was There's Still Tomorrow, and we were lucky enough to meet Paola Cortellesi, who made the film. But this is a really good example of a wonderful movie which is profoundly political. So that day in 1946, one of the most profoundly important days in Italy's history, the day that women got the vote, and that women were able to pass the right to vote to their daughters, and from their daughters to another generation of daughters. This is not small stuff. This is not a sidebar. This is fundamental to the way democracy can be passed on. So the film itself is extremely political. Also, music is an invaluable asset when you're doing that. At the end of the Killing Fields, I had a problem. The film was playing really, really well, but it was so tough that the audience was struggling to work out what they're supposed to feel. I needed an answer. And after trying various things, we ended up with a piece of music. And the justification of this piece of music is, as it happened, we knew exactly the date that the incident we were portraying had happened, the exact date. And on that exact date, the piece of music we chose was the #1 record across the world. So in a sense, it was luck. So as this car pulls up and you hear the music coming out of this car, it is likely, or at least highly possible, that that could have been the piece of music that was around. So we used it, and it transformed the film. It allowed the audience to breathe at the end of this very tough 2 hours and 20 minutes. You could feel them breathing. So this piece of music, in a sense, summed up a very torturous story. 2 men who'd been separated in Cambodia, one of whom was incredibly fortunate to live, and they got together at the end. Just a nice and rather a charming story. Patsy was with me. At the premiere in New York, I'd had quite a lot of problems trying to buy the rights to that song, you can imagine. As it happened, sitting immediately in front of us was Yoko Ono, with a guy I knew, and sitting literally there. And the film ended, and the song you just heard ended, and my friend pointed out that Puttnam, the producer, was sitting behind her, and she turned round, and she was in floods of tears, and she climbed over the back of the seat and dropped into our laps, sobbing. And she said, "Oh, my God," she said, "John would have been so happy. That's exactly the emotions he was hoping for when he wrote the song." So it's a wonderful thing how history moves and how quite accidentally you end up fulfilling the original writer's ambition as well as your own. I like that story. It's a wonderful moment. Couple of slides. Number 1, cinema has a hotline to our subconscious. It direct dials into your brain in a way that few other medium do. It literally direct dials into your brain. That's why we can remember images and messages and stories from movies in a way that we often can't from other media. A friend of mine, Wim Wenders, a very, very good director, said this. He said, "Film shapes values. It forms habits. And it influences trends of hopes and fears. Images are the weapons of the future." Now think how true that is. How often do you see a story on television which, if there aren't images to go through it with it, the stories don't work? So a drone attack, irrespective of whether you film that drone attack, requires images of a drone attack. So images have been used in a sense instead of, or at least to amplify words. The core of what I teach is about identity. So my argument here is that when you go to the cinema, you may not realize this, when you go to the cinema, you're actually going to see yourselves. 1 or 2 of the people in the middle here clearly don't agree. You're actually going to see yourself. You're going to see how you respond to what's on the screen. whether you can identify with what's going on the screen, with the people on the screen. That's one of the reasons that actors tend to be very handsome or beautiful, is because that's where the identity lies. So identity is fundamental to a really successful film. I'm president of the National Film and Television School in the UK. I've been with the school, believe it or not, for over 50 years, which means that each year at graduation, I get to make a speech. Here's a very short clip from the speech I made last year, 2025, where I talk about the power of story and the power of identity. And I think it makes its point quite well.
Let's tell a very short story. Imagine a young man, a good number of years ago, standing on the platform of a station on his way to work. As he stands there, trains coming by, and he sees an extraordinarily beautiful woman in the window of one of the trains. Door's closed, she's gone. But instead of giving up, for the next 3 weeks, he goes to the station and at exactly the same time stands in the same spot and scans the trains as they come through. And literally 3 weeks later, lo and behold, he spots her. He jumps into the train, starts a conversation. I'm here today because that's what my dad did. And the point I'm making here is really important. If you can tell a story like that well, what's amazing is the audience recognize it. And they spot, oh, you know what? That could be me. Or I know someone like that. And that's our role. Our job is to offer people, when they sit as our audience, moments at which they can recognize themselves on screen. People would essentially come to the cinema to see their own experiences, or to relate to their own experiences, or to maybe dream a bit. And that's the job. Uniquely, we do have the ability momentarily to change people's lives. Very, very, very few people have that. You have it. So all I do is beg you to use it well. Thank you very much, and have a great day.
So you see the circularity here. Bob Dylan saying, if you have the power to change someone's life, why would you waste it? Have you thought about that since I said it? Has it echoed at all? That actually you can. And filmmakers uniquely can. And people who deal in images uniquely can. And people who tell stories and books uniquely can. You want to be a unique person, or do you want to be an idiot? You've got choice. Idiocy sits out there for all of us. If that's the route you actually want to choose. It's easy. And it also is less complicated, and you don't have to amaze anybody at all. Quickly, most valuable asset. I believe this. I believe that your own experiences are your most valuable asset, without any doubt at all. And I think it's a very, very important facet of your lives. And telling your own story is the place you start, even if you're just writing a diary. Telling your own story and then finding out if other people share aspects of that story. I'm slightly thrown. Sorry, I don't know how that got there. This is me. I'm very sorry. As a very, very young man, but just gives you an idea of how passionate I was about the cinema. Here's a question. How many of you ask yourself this? It's an absolutely serious question. How often do you ask yourself, who the hell am I? Who am I? Am I the person that I want to be? Am I the person that I'd like to be? Am I the person that is thrilled to bits to be me? Or am I actually someone who wishes they were somebody else? Now, I can stand here today knowing that Patsy and I've lived the most wonderful, fulfilling life, as much by luck as by judgment, as much by luck. But the great thing is, I know who I am. I know my strengths, I know my weaknesses. I know that I've made almost as many bad films as I've made good films. And the really important thing here is, I was exactly the same person when I made an unsuccessful film I was when I made a successful film. I wasn't a different human being. I just had failed on that particular occasion and hopefully redeemed myself later. So the issue of who am I is absolutely fundamental question to ask yourself and to grapple with. Some of you will know the football team, Manchester United, and they had a very famous manager called Alex Ferguson. Alex Ferguson had a stroke, bad stroke, and they thought his sons thought he would die. So they started to make a film about him and with him when he was in hospital. The film is a remarkable film. It's just called Ferguson. But I want to show you one clip, because this is about who are you? What debts do you owe? Who are the people who have made it possible for you to be here today? Because these are really important questions. So we're back to who am I? Knowing who you are, knowing where you came from, knowing where your father and mother came from, knowing where your grandmother and your grandmother came from. They are you. It's part and parcel of who you are. And you're a continuum of who they were. And you can't escape that. I can't be more passionate about this. You are a continuum of their hopes, their dreams, their troubles, their dangers. You're it, guys. And I and most people of my generation are totally relying on you to correct the extraordinary mistakes that have been made by my generation and by successive generations. You're going to have to clean up. And you have to clean up because every generation makes mistakes. You'll make your own mistakes. But don't expect anyone to come out and help you. You're going to have to do it. That's why who you are is fundamental. I know I'm looking at you. Some of you don't believe this. It's fundamental to the purpose of your lives. Get a grip of that, and you'll make possibly a real success of it. If you can't and don't, you're in trouble. And I mean it sincerely. Catching the zeitgeist of your generation is vital. It really is. Here's the most important line I ever took out from a movie. You ready for this? From James Dean in a film called East of Eden. A man has a choice. I'm sorry it says man, but it applies to women as well. A person has a choice, and it's the choice they make that makes them. Makes them a man, makes them a woman. It's choices. You make choices. Make the wrong choices, and you screw up. Make the right choices, and you'll be okay. And the most important thing is friendship. Make the right friends who will bring the best out of you, and you've got a really good chance. Make the wrong friends, they will screw you up, because they have no interest in your success. The wrong friend does not wish to help you become more successful. Believe me. The right friend is as eager for you to be as successful as they are for themselves. There's nothing more important I could possibly, there's 65 years of experience talking here. The purpose of that clip, which is a film I made a long, long time ago, is to say this. Why do some people emerge as icons? Why do some people emerge that transition through generations? You go to a bookshop in Venice, and you go to a place that sells postcards. There will be a postcard of James Dean. What is it? What was it that turns an individual into an icon? It's quite complicated, a complicated thought, but it's really, really worth thinking about. Nearly finished. Here's a line. I never met this woman, Shannon Vara. I think it's a really important line. Understanding is not an act, but a process. It's a lifetime struggle to make sense of the world. And my purpose of being here today at all is to give you some beginning in understanding the whole process of understanding. It's a long, complicated process, but your lives in the end will depend on how good you get at it. I've been very lucky. I've worked in politics. As was said earlier, I've worked on all kinds of different issues, but understanding each of them has tended to be a struggle. I'm going to cheer everything up for a moment. You mentioned Ennio Morricone. Probably the closest thing to a genius I was ever lucky enough to work with. He was an extraordinary person. And the most difficult film I've attempted was The Mission. It was made under very, very difficult circumstances. So here's a series of images and music which hopefully will encourage you to know that when it goes right, when you get things right, when everyone comes together and does the right thing, right time, you can, as you said, you can create magic, and that magic can transcend generations in exactly the same way that I would argue that James Dean does. So here's a selection of material from The Mission. It's a film, essentially, about sacrifice. Very unpopular subject, sacrifice, but a very, very important subject, because all of us at some point have to ask ourselves a question. What are we prepared to sacrifice for what? It's tough. So I'll just finish with 2 slides, very simple. One is this. Why are you interested in the things you're interested in. And this is all of a piece with who am I? Because if you can answer this question, you could begin to answer the bigger question. Who on earth, who the hell am I? Lastly, as a child of the 1960s, I was very familiar with a civil rights leader called Eldridge Cleaver. This is the most important message I can leave with you, I think. The truth is, you're either going to be part of the solution or you can be part of the problem. Your choice. You can be part of the solution or part of the problem. Interesting enough, 100 years earlier, Abraham Lincoln had said, you can't escape the responsibility of tomorrow by evading it today. Now, I used this slide a few days ago in New York. The kids in New York, pretty well the same age as you, they have a challenge. How are they going to deal with the aberration that is their president? And they all know it. They know that their country is in deep, deep shit. How are they going to deal with it? So this slide is more than just a slide. This is, are they going to be able to be part of the solution in getting rid of this man and hopefully giving ourselves and democracy a shot? Or are they just going to be apathetic and part of the problem? So I've just finished this. Your choice, just as it was their choice. Tough choice. Get over it. Thanks very much for listening to me.
Thank you so much for such an inspiring presentation, thought-provoking questions you posed to us here on stage, but also to the entire room. Lots of things, lots of ideas to think about, and I would leave my colleague, Mr. Fracas, and the students, Sophia and Maria, to kick off with the questions before we open to the room, so that also the audience will have a chance to ask the questions. Mr. Fracas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Corey. Thank you very much, sir, for being here with us. And we prepared with the students some questions after watching the biopic that you kindly suggested us. And I would start precisely with something about the topic of cinema and historical memory. We just saw a couple of clips from your movies, and in many of your films, The Killing Fields, The Mission, Cal, Chariots of Fire, these movies are ultimately about history pressing upon individual lives. And what attracts you to moments where private ethics collides with widespread historical violence at a certain moment?
I think of all the clips I showed, the one that I find in a way most moving is the Alex Ferguson one. Because what he's saying to us is the past is the present. The past is who we are. We can't escape it. None of you in the room can escape the actions, activities, successes, failures of your grandparents and parents. It's your reality. And one of the reasons I love the Paola Cortellesi movie is what she's depicting is a fantastically important moment in the history of this country, but particularly in the history of women in this country. And what was amazing when Patsy and I were talking to her in the end of last year is that no one had done this movie before. This was an incident. It was like a footnote almost in a history book. But actually, it had been the turning point for every Italian woman in this room. It was your turning point. That success was won for you. And your question, my question to you is, I think it's an answer to the question, is that piece of history is now your responsibility. You've been given these choices. What are you going to do with them? You're going to build on them? You're going to make a success of them? Or you're going to take them for granted and just move on? Because they were hard won. And that's what Paola was trying to say in the movie. And what's wonderful, the film was so successful. It was a wonderful, I think it's a surprise to her, wonderful surprise to everybody. But she told you a story, and I address this specifically to the women in this audience. She told you a story. Pick it up and run with it. It doesn't end there. It didn't just end with the right to vote. I mean, I think I could go on. I think that does hopefully explain why history is important. And what Alex is saying is, as a coach, and indeed as a teacher, we need to constantly remind you of the obligations you have, of your history, what brought you here, who's paying for you here. You know, what sacrifices, to use that word again, is somebody making. Don't ever forget those. Don't take them for granted. We can't even take, frankly, we can't take anything for granted. Life's a struggle, but it can be a triumphant struggle, or it can be an utterly debilitating struggle. Your choice.
So our second question is regarding something that you said in your documentary. So you once compared filmmakers to people pulling the pin out of a grenade and throwing it over a wall without seeing the consequences. Do storytellers today, in an epoch where master narratives seem too long to be gone, underestimate the consequences of the world they create?
Yes, I think unfortunately they do. It's not quite as bad as it was at the time I made that remark. Incidentally, that remark made me the most unpopular man in Hollywood, without any doubt at all. It didn't go down well. But I do think it's a case that, pulling a grenade out of, a pin out of a grenade, throwing it over the wall and not going and finding out what happened when it exploded is an issue of incredible irresponsibility, isn't it? I mean, I don't think any of us would argue with that. And yet, a lot of films get made where no one's thought through the consequences. I had an experience, and I say this absolutely against myself. I doubt very much if any of you have seen a film called Midnight Express. But in Midnight Express, we did something quite deliberate. We needed to show how our hero, you call him that, moved from being in a prison to being put in a sort of mental asylum. And to do this, there was an awful moment where he got into a fight, and he literally, are you ready for this? He literally bit the tongue out of the person, the protagonist. Now, the protagonist was an equally grim person, a really grim person. I went to the premiere in New York, expecting, and the idea was, you see, when this happened, the audience was going to go, "Whoa," like that, "Whoa," and come back up, and he was in a mental home. So they would understand, oh my goodness me, this man's gone nuts. So I'm in Times Square at the premiere, and we get to this moment, and we think we know what we're doing, and when it happened, half the audience stood up and started cheering. And I realized I didn't know anything about audiences. Somehow or other, we'd provoked a cheer at the very moment where we thought we'd provoke a moment of horror. And that had an enormous impact on me in terms of the films I subsequently made. I kept thinking, how did I get that so wrong? How did I so misunderstand the emotions we provoked that I made that mistake? So that was a very, very big moment for me. And I think that's probably why that line, in fact, I know I did. I used that line soon after that event.
So the third question we have for you is, you have spoken about AI and technologies like ChatGPT, not with panic, but with seriousness. What human capacities become more important and not less in the age of artificial intelligence?
Creativity. I mean, it's an easy thing for me to say it because I believe in that, but I think it's true. I think that the more successful AI is to dealing with a lot of issues for us, the more important will be original ideas. Because as yet, AI, and it'll be a long time, I think, before AI develops original ideas. It can adapt an idea, it can even, maybe in many cases, improve an idea, but it can't have the original idea. So original creativity, the ability to stimulate people through original ideas of creativity, will become more valuable than it has ever been as a direct result of the application of AI. I'm convinced of that.
I think that we have time for questions from the public. If there are, you just have to raise your hand, and we have the first one. Thanks.
Hello? Oh, yeah, okay. Thank you. That was a lovely talk, the journey of your life. I was thinking about it, reflecting on that, and I wondered, you're a storyteller, you're an image maker, you think pictorially and telling a story, and you summarize a lot of your life today. Is there a story you still want to tell? Is there a film you would love to make that would summarize all that you feel and you've learned and you want to still say?
Really nice. I've never been asked that question before, but I really haven't. It's interesting because I left the industry in 1997. I think if I was given the opportunity to do it, I would really like to tell my father's story. Because he was a remarkable man, and I think I spent my entire life really trying to live up to the person I believe him to be. He was born really quite poor. He went to work when he was 12. He became a rather well-known photographer. He fought through the war, but most important of all, he was the kindest man. I never heard my father really say anything unpleasant about him. The worst you'd ever get, he'd say, "I don't know about him," and he'd go like that. And that meant this person was despicable, really. But Dad would say, "I don't know about him." I'd love to do a film about the nature of simple kindness. And the truth is, I'm not sure I know how to do it, because I've got this, maybe I'd over-romanticize him. It's possible. I hope not. But I was brought, I didn't meet him until I was 5 years old, and I'm sure that had an influence after the war. But I'm the son of the kindest man I ever met. And what I try to do with my life is to be even a fraction of the person he was. And I'd love to tell his story.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Lorenzo, and I had a question about when you talked about the political side of cinema. And do you think that films and series have the power to change a person's beliefs, specifically when they're shown like the same ideology over and over?
Beliefs, it's a tough one, beliefs. But do they have the power to change people's attitudes? Yes, I think they do. There was a series, I don't know if it played in Italy, if you've seen it, a series in the UK called Adolescence last year. Did you see it? About a 12-year-old boy who kills a classmate. What was revelatory, I think, to my generation certainly, was the idea that you could be bullied by an emoji. I mean, I thought emojis were just nice things you put at the end of a text, with a heart that actually they were a language. And I think that was an enormous wake-up for a lot of adults. What was brilliant is Netflix allowed that film to be shown in every single school in Britain. And I think it was a very powerful film. It's a disturbing film, a very powerful film. And I think that films like that can have the ability to change attitudes. The example I tend to use, and it may sound a bit weird, in the 1950s, 40s and 50s in America, they avoided the issue of race. They literally managed to steer around any questions of race. And then in the very late 50s, a number of filmmakers made movies because they had a couple of wonderful stars, Sidney Poitier, Harry Belafonte, started making films that involved the race issue. In fact, there's a moment, I'll stand up, there's a moment in a film called The Heat of the Night, which actually won the Oscar, where Sidney Poitier, during a scene, slaps a white man. That had never happened in a movie. It never happened. It was called The Slap That Was Heard Around the World. And it really changed the way that films were looked at. All of a sudden, here was a film allowing a black guy detective to hit a white protagonist. So there are moments where films can offer a moment of truth, a necessary moment of truth, where people think, oh my God, I just realized I've been living a dream. I didn't think there were racial problems. But actually there are. And this explosion by Sidney Poitier was one of those moments. And I think almost every year, there's something in some film somewhere that illustrates a similar thing, and it causes people to think twice about the attitudes they have. That's probably almost as much as you can hope for. People have got similar attitudes, but all of a sudden they have to think, oh my goodness me, I never looked at it that way. I never thought of it that way. That's maybe as much as a filmmaker can hope for. Beliefs, tougher.
Thank you, sir. I think we have 2 more questions on this side.
How did you find the way to respond the question, who I am?
I don't want to embarrass her because she's sitting at the back. By marrying the right person, honestly. I'm not sure, I mean, I know I wouldn't. I would have been a very different person if I hadn't married my wife. We were at school together. And I think my desire caught between my dad, who I adored, my mum was very nice, and Patsy's expectations of me made me question who am I? Am I going to meet their expectations? Because their expectations were very honourable. My dad said something to me. We were walking to the station one morning, and I knew I was going to do very badly in my exams. I knew it. And I was trying to break the news gently to him that I'm afraid he's going to be very disappointed when he sees the exam results. And he stopped me. He said, David, I don't mind if you decide you want to be, this is his words, if you want to be a coal miner, just promise me one thing. You're going to be one of the world's best coal miners. Now that sounds silly, right? But the response, the weight that took off my shoulders. It's not about exam results. It's about who I'm going to be, how hard I'm going to try to be the best of the people I might be able to be. I think that the who I am moment, in a sense, grew from there. I don't have to be what other people expect me to be. I've got to be the best that I want me to be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, hello. So before you said, why do we do what we do, or what we like to do? I want to ask you, why do you produce?
Because I couldn't direct. I think is the honest answer. That was the opportunity I had. I'll tell you the story, it's very simple, rather dramatic. I was in advertising, and I was 27 years old, it was the 1960s, and I didn't want to, I'd had enough of advertising. I thought I'd done that, very arrogant, but I thought I'd done that. What am I going to do? Well, I'd like to be either in the music industry or in the film industry. Now, I looked at the music industry, and there were clearly some very smart people in that, so I thought, well, I'll avoid that. But maybe the film industry don't look so smart. So an uncle of mine worked in a laboratory and arranged for me to see the head of the union. This is an extraordinary story, it's true. That the head of the union. I went to see this guy, gives me a cup of tea, and he says to me, have you got a union ticket? I said, no. I want to be in the film industry. I haven't got a union ticket. He said, well, you can't be in the film industry unless you've got a union ticket. I said, well, how do I get a union ticket? He said, well, you've got to be in the film industry to get a union ticket. So when I realized it was completely nepotistic business, really. So it was very polite. I got up to leave, and I got to the door. My hand was on the door. And he called out to me. He said, of course, you could always be a producer. I said, what? He said, yes, you could be a producer. You don't need a ticket to be a producer. So I said, well, what's a producer? And I sat down again, had another cup of tea, and explained to me what a producer was. And that's why I'm a producer.
What is a producer?
A producer is a person who pulls all the elements together of a film. In my case, I was lucky. I really loved stories and storytelling. So it starts with the script. It starts with what story do you want to tell? Who's going to help you as a writer to tell that story? I was very lucky. I worked with a very brilliant guy in the ad agency who became a very good director, Alan Parker. So we made a story. The story was how I met Patsy, essentially. And then I knew a young group called the Bee Gees. I got them to do the music. And anyway, one thing led to another. And really, I didn't really know what I was doing. There's the truth. But I pretended I knew what I was doing. And no one actually called me out. Probably should have done. By the time I did my third film, I did think I did know what I was doing. And I'd survived. So I think I'm a producer because I was bored with advertising, not able to be anything else other than a producer. Honest, that guy, when I had my hand on the door, if he'd said to me, you could always be a film editor, I'd have been a film editor. I would have done whatever job he told me I could do, but it was producing. And I kind of love it. And what I also realized was it fitted my personality. I liked organizing. I liked calming people down. Now, when there was a big row, I was quite good at saying, yeah, but just a minute, think about this, think about that. So I was quite good at keeping people organized and people keeping calm. So it fitted, actually, without me knowing it, it happened to fit my own personality. I mean, we could talk all night. There are other reasons, but you're probably bored already, so I won't give you any more. But thanks for asking.
Thank you.
Do we have any more questions from the audience? Yes, at the back. Okay, sorry. Yeah.
So, what do you think about today's Hollywood situation, and how did the film production have changed?
Film production is now swiveled really to streaming companies. The streaming companies now dominate what we used to call Hollywood. Hollywood's really a state of mind. Very few movies are made in Hollywood. Very, very, very few. Probably as many films are made in Italy as are made in Hollywood, honestly. But it is a big streaming business. So what Hollywood really is an attitude. And what happens is relates to risk. Remember the slide I told you that I said to you about capitalism, that in the end it's a capital-intensive business, and are you going to turn a profit? At different moments during the 30 years I worked in it, that notion of where profit lay in the equation altered slightly. Once a year, when you look at the Oscars, what matters is the quality. There's that one moment that matters, which means that everyone in the studios, everyone financing films, wants to be part of that moment. I mean, I was very lucky winning an Oscar. I didn't expect to, honestly, and certainly didn't expect to win it for Chariots of Fire. But everyone's after that one golden moment. The rest of the time, is the film going to make more money than it cost? So the huge issue, and as I say, this is not really a particularly good answer. The real issue is constantly balancing risk, reward, culture, values, profit. It's a constant shifting thing. And every year, the equation slightly alters. That's what's interesting. There's no one constant. After a very successful box office run, that particular studio will be more prepared to invest in something more risky. After they've lost some money on a number of risky films, they're going to look for something much more safe. And that the equation shifts. And I put this slide up about zeitgeist. The difference between successful and unsuccessful producers, is the ones that can capture the zeitgeist and the ones that can't. And I stopped producing films in 1997 because I felt in my heart that I was losing it. And I didn't want to see my career decline, so I decided to stop. But it is about the zeitgeist, catching the zeitgeist, being aware of that zeitgeist. And this kind of magical period doesn't last more than 10 or 12 years, where you are the zeitgeist. If you're lucky enough to do that, you're going to have a very nice career.
I think there are more questions over there. Yep. In the middle.
Thank you for the speech. My question is rather on your educational platform, Atticus. You've spent years trying to bridge the gap between education and creative industries. So in your opinion, what is the missing piece? Mentorship, or more giving students the stakes, real stakes on the outcome, on what they're working on?
It's a really interesting question. I think mentorship is a big issue, and we could interpret mentorship in all sorts of ways and at different moments. I've, in the last 3 years, been teaching, and I was quite surprised that I took to it. I was nervous at first, teaching 15 and 16-year-olds. And what I've discovered is if I can engage their imaginations in who they are, what their stories is, and I always say to them, go home, talk to your grandparents and take a microphone or a phone with you, record their stories, and then see how their stories parallel your stories. I think once young people, including all of you, once young people see what's possible, the power of what's possible, how you can make that more powerful by editing, how you can make it more powerful by framing the shots properly, people become quite inspired. And they say, oh my goodness me, I can do this. In a sense, that's what happened to me. I saw a movie, The Graduate, and I thought, you know what? There's nothing in that film that I couldn't really do. Turned out to be some of it I certainly couldn't do, but I think belief, self-belief, the utilization of technology, sensible use of the utilization of technology, and believing, here's the most important thing, believing you have a story to tell and that technology exists for you to tell that story. Because remember, you can put it on YouTube. Your story can be seen by literally millions of people. And that's what's different. When I started, there were a whole series of processes. We worked on celluloid. You had to go to cinemas. You had to persuade people to come to the cinema. You don't have that anymore. You've got a direct, it's a bit like that line about direct dial. You've got a direct dial into the imaginations of your audience. And if you can capture them, someone's going to say, you know what, that's a really brilliant person. I wonder what other stories she's got. I wonder what other stories she'd like to tell. And all of a sudden, surprise, surprise, you're a storyteller, and then you're a storyteller, you're a filmmaker. So the barriers to being a filmmaker have been dramatically reduced in the last 20 years. You've been really patient. I think my presentations went on far longer than most of you wanted. But anyway, I'm afraid you were stuck with it. Thanks very, very much for listening to me, and all the luck in the world.